Let's have a look into the second dynasty of Portuguese kings. I opted for dividing this one into two videos, so this one will look into the kings that reigned between 1385 and 1521. And we start with the founder of the dynasty, João I, known as Mestre of Avis and of fond memory. He was born on the 11th April 1357 and died on the 13th August 1433. He was married only once to Princess Philippa of Lancaster, and he was never meant to be a king because he was the illegitimate son of King Pedro and a lady called Teresa Lourenço. At the age of 6, his father named him the Master of the Order of Avis, a military and religious order. The reign of his half-brother Fernando saw growth in courtly intrigue, and parties were formed for and against the Queen Leonor d'Elche. João himself was temporarily arrested. When Fernando died, his daughter and heir was married to the King of Castille, so Portuguese independence was threatened and a succession crisis began. Several parties arise, amongst which the Castilian party, supported by Queen Leonor and her lover, Count João Andeiro. This man was eventually slain by the Master of Avis. Then there was the party of Inês Castro's sons, João and Inês. They were the half-brothers of this king, and they were strong candidates, but factions in favour of the Master of Avis made an active effort to repel them as heirs. Then there is the faction in favour of João, Master of Avis himself, who is defended by names such as Master João das Regras, a famous jurist. So João becomes King of Portugal, and he will fight Castile and the other contenders for years, aided by General Nuno Álvares Pereira, best known for his intervention at the Battle of Aljubarrota, which ends with a Portuguese victory. The history of Anglo-Portuguese relations goes far back, but this reign will reiterate and strengthen them. In 1386, Portugal and England signed the Treaty of Windsor. John of Gaunt, Duke of Lancaster, was then married to Constanza, a contender for the Castilian throne. The Duke allied himself to King João, and the alliance was sealed through the king's marriage to Princess Philippa of Lancaster, the Duke's eldest daughter. Peace with Castile only comes in 1411. The high cost of war, together with the impact of the Black Plague, led to difficult times with high taxes and inflation. In 1415, the king decided to venture a military expedition to North Africa to conquer Ceuta. Ceuta is conquered and remains under Portuguese control until 1668. João was highly educated, he was prudent, but he was also willing to explore. He became the longest reigning monarch in Portuguese history, with a grand total of 48 years in power. One of his legacies in architecture is the monastery of Santa Maria da Vitória, better known as Monastery of Batalha, built to commemorate the Portuguese victory in Aljubarrota. Then comes his son, Duarte I, known as the Philosopher or the Eloquent. He was born on the 31st October 1391 and died on the 9th September 1438. He was married once to Eleanor of Aragon. And he was also not meant to reign, he only became heir after the death of his older brother Afonso. In 1412 he begins intervening in state affairs, but in practice he only reigned for 5 years. This king ordered the compilation of Portuguese laws. He also promulgated the mental law, which protected the unity of the crown estate. Under the influence of this law, aside some exceptions, only the heir could inherit crown properties. Power continues to be centralized, and Portugal continues to expand beyond continental Europe. During an incursion to fish, the king's brother Infant Fernando was captured. Ceuta was proposed as ransom and the Portuguese court refused. Infant Fernando died in captivity, which caused a severe psychological weight on the Portuguese court for generations. Like his mother and father, he was a very cultured individual. He wrote essays and books on morals and religious customs. It is said that the impact of reigning, together with the loss of his brother, led to the decline of the king's psychological condition. Like his mother before him, he succumbed to the Black Plague. Duarte and his siblings are known as the Illustrious Generation, a term that has been in use at least since the 16th century by poet Luís de Camões. Then comes his son Afonso V, known as the African due to military interventions in North Africa. He was married twice, first to his cousin Isabel of Coimbra and then to his niece Joanina of Trastamara. Due to his father's early death, he becomes king at the age of 6, so the early part of his reign is spent in successive regencies. His mother, the queen, serves as regent until 1439, as his father intended. Then the court, a political assembly, replace her with his uncle Pedro. Pedro is a well-travelled, cultured and influential political figure of this era. He negotiated the marriage of his young daughter to the young king and was in charge until the king reached his majority in 1446. That same year, the first Portuguese legal corpus is published, and it had been ordered by the previous king, Duarte. Soon a mix of courtly intrigue and the new king's eagerness to show his authority lead him to declare Infant Pedro an enemy of the realm. Against the will of several family members, the king faces his uncle at the Battle of Alfarrobeira. Infant Pedro was killed in combat, and from that moment the Duke of Bragança achieved greater influence. The following years see the king granting political pardons as he continues military actions in North Africa, some of which were successful. During his reign in 1453, Constantinople was conquered by the Ottomans and Pope Calixtus ordered a new crusade. Portugal continues to sail across the African coast and invests in the creation of new Atlantic trade routes. In 1475, the king marries Joanina, his niece, who is a pretender to the throne of Castille. His intention is to unite Portugal and Castile through this marriage, but he is defeated and eventually gives up his rights to the Castilian throne. In 1477, he abdicates on his son, though the official rule of the kingdom does return to him. Eventually, he retires to a convent. Then comes João, known as the Perfect Prince, second of his name. He was born on the 3rd May 1455 and died on the 25th October 1495. He was married once to Leonor of Viseu. João begins governing the country even before he becomes king because his father retired to the said convent. Internally, his reign was marked by a tendency to centralize authority in the figure of the king. In an effort to diminish the power of nobility, he takes several measures, especially against the House of Bragança. Fernando II, Duke of Bragança, was executed. Diogo, Duke of Viseu, was killed by the king, and he was his cousin and brother-in-law. Both these men had been accused of conspiring in favor of the Castilian monarchs. Externally, the kingdom continued to expand overseas. When Christopher Columbus reached America, Portugal and Spain signed the Treaty of Tordesillas. This treaty divided the world into two spheres of influence, the Portuguese and the Spanish sphere. Like his father, he married a first cousin and they had one son, Afonso. This son married Infanta Isabel of Castille, and there was some hope for an Iberian union, but it never came to be. Afonso died in the sequence of a horsefall. With no legitimate heirs, the king considers the possibility of legitimizing a son he had out of wedlock, Jorge. However, under the influence of the queen, he leaves the throne to his cousin and her brother, Manuel. Manuel I of Portugal was known as the Fortunate. He was born on the 31st May 1469 and died on the 13th December 1521. He was married 3 times, first to Isabella of Aragon, then to Maria of Aragon, and then to Eleanor of Austria. Manuel grew up at a time of intense courtly intrigue. He saw his own brother murdered by the king, to whom his sister was married. As the king had no heirs and under the queen's influence, Manuel is named heir to the throne. During his reign, Portugal experienced a period of exceptional wealth. In 1498, a new maritime route to India was established to and from Lisbon, and Lisbon becomes a great centre of trade. The land that is now Brazil was officially reached 2 years later, and Portugal explored the sea as far as Greenland. Ruling on the verge of absolutism, Manuel tried to modernize the country, particularly the judiciary field and taxation process. He also initiated a new compilation of laws, known as the Ordenações Manuelinas, which updated the former Ordenações Afonsinas. He was a very religious Christian Catholic, but in the beginning of his reign he was in favor of religious freedom. This policy was reversed due to his relations with Los Reyes Católicos, the Spanish monarchs. They pressed him to take severe measures against the Jewish community, and Manuel, who dreamed of an Iberian Union, wrote to the Pope in 1515 requesting the establishment of the Portuguese Inquisition. This was not completed until 1536. Nonetheless, he was well aware of the economic, cultural and scientific benefits brought by the Jewish community. After granting them 10 months to convert, he takes measures to keep them in the country. Children under the age of 14 were removed from their families to be raised by Christians. Many harbours were closed to the Jewish diaspora. After severe reactions on the side of the Jewish community, the king decided to extend the conversion period to 20 years. He also forbade judicial inquiries into the converts' religious practices, but feelings of religious intolerance grew throughout his reign. Manuel was a king of the Renaissance regarding his investment in cultural, scientific and artistic developments. He invests in the restructuring of university studies, and his name is given to a new architectural style, the Manuelino. In 1514 he sent an embassy to Pope Leo X, which included an elephant and a rhinoceros. The Iberian Union doesn't come to place during his reign. It would have been achieved through his marriage to the heir of the Spanish throne, Isabella, and their son, infant Miguel de Paz. However, both the princess and the child died before the dream could be accomplished, and it was postponed for a few generations.